Imagine for a second guarding your absolute deepest, most intimate spiritual practices your entire life. I mean, the quiet rituals you do when literally no one is watching.
Right, the absolute core of your personal devotion.
Exactly. Now imagine taking those fiercely guarded practices and just handing them over to your greatest intellectual rival, someone who, dedicated their entire life to a totally different philosophical path.
It sounds impossible, but that is exactly what the legendary scholar Madhusudana Saraswati did.
Yeah, and welcome to this custom deep dive. We know you love gaining these thorough, multi-perspective aha moments without getting bogged down by all the jargon. So today, we have a really profound mission.
We do. We are exploring the convergence of two absolute towering figures in Indian philosophy, Adi Shankaracharya, the founder of Advaita, and Vallabhacharya, who founded Shuddhadvaita.
And usually, if you just glance at the history, these two are framed as polar opposites, right? The path of pure knowledge versus the path of absolute devotion. But we've got this brilliant lecture today by scholar Vid Maitri Goswami from the Global Festival of Oneness, and it reveals something mind-blowing.
Yeah, it reveals that they actually meet perfectly at the summit. And, to set the stage for how these supposed rivals actually harmonize, the source cites this really beautiful analogy from the Upanishads.
Oh, I love this one.
Right. It describes birds flying out in just countless different directions all day long. They're searching for grain, flying through different territories, facing totally different winds.
But by evening, they all return to the exact same home, the same tree to rest.
Exactly. The flight paths are vastly different, but the resting place is identical. And that shared home for both of these acharyas is a concept called Brahmavad.
So to really understand how these two opposing scholars agree, we have to look at this playing field they're both standing on. Brahmavad.
Because neither of them ever tried to establish like a totally independent brand or a totally rival system. They always introduced themselves, first and foremost, as Brahmavadis.
Meaning they base their entire philosophical systems strictly on the Upanishads, which establish Brahman as the infinite ultimate reality. But okay, I actually have to push back on this fundamental premise right out of the gate.
Oh, really? Okay, go for it.
Because human beings, we define things by differentiating them.
Right.
Like, I define a chair by pointing out how it is fundamentally not a table. I draw a conceptual boundary.
Sure. Human cognition relies on boundaries.
Right. But if Brahman is infinite and all-inclusive, meaning it excludes absolutely nothing, how can anyone possibly define it? And if we can't define it, how can two towering scholars spend centuries debating its nature?
Well, what's fascinating here is that this inability to define Brahman isn't a bug in their philosophy. It's the actual feature.
Wait, really? How so?
Because the moment you fully define something, you've drawn that boundary you just mentioned. You've limited it. And if you limit it, well, it's no longer infinite.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so the source explains that Brahman disperses something called Jnana Shakti, which translates to the finite power of knowledge into individual human minds according to its own desire.
Okay, let's unpack this. You're saying the infinite reality intentionally fragments its own comprehensibility.
Precisely. Because a finite human intellect just cannot hold an infinite reality. So we only get to understand this specific characteristic of Brahman that has been revealed to our specific intellect.
Which perfectly brings us to that famous metaphor, right? The blind man and the elephant.
Yes, the classic parable.
I mean, anyone who took a Philosophy 101 class knows this one. 10 blind men touch different parts of an elephant. One feels the chest and says, oh, it's a wall. Another touches the leg and says, no, it's a pillar.
And neither of them is wrong, but neither captures the whole elephant either.
Right. But applying it here to Jnana Shakti is just wild, because if we apply this directly to Shankaracharya and Vallabhacharya, their differing philosophical systems aren't actually in conflict at all.
Exactly. They aren't mutually exclusive truth claims competing for dominance.
There are just incredibly rigorous scholars describing different parts of the exact same infinite elephant.
Right. But because our knowledge is finite, we naturally fixate on the leg or the wall or the tail. And we build entire dogmas around that one point of contact.
Which introduces a huge logical problem for me. Because what happens when the part of the elephant Shankaracharya describes and the part Vallabhacharya describes seem completely logically contradictory?
And that is the exact tension the source addresses. It introduces this concept of Viruddha Dharma, which means contradictory characteristic.
Okay, so how does that work?
Well, because our human minds are finite, we view concepts like jnana, which is knowledge, and ajna, ignorance, as exact opposites, binary opposites.
Right, like light and dark. You can't have both in the exact same spot.
Exactly. In a finite system, that's true. But the source notes that in an infinite being, all contradictory characteristics actually find refuge. Brahman is the ultimate paradox where opposites coexist flawlessly.
Wow. So it has to encompass the contradiction, or else it wouldn't be infinite.
Right. If it couldn't hold both, it would be limited. And this really validates your critical thinking as a listener. When different philosophical systems make conflicting claims about ultimate reality, none of them are entirely wrong.
They're just trying to cram an infinite reality into a tiny, finite, logical box.
Exactly.
So to really test this harmonization, we have to look at the biggest, most glaring contradiction between Advaita and Shuddhadvaita, which is the creation of the universe.
Yes, the ultimate debate. Maya versus realism.
Let's break this down. So Shankaracharya sees creation through the lens of Maya, which is often translated as illusion. The classic analogy is walking in the dark and mistaking a piece of rope for a snake.
Right, your heart pounds, you sweat. The snake feels completely real in that moment.
Exactly. But when the lights come on, the snake vanishes because it was never actually there. It was a false projection. So in Shankaracharya's view, the universe is ultimately mithya, or false. It's an illusion placed over the reality of Brahman.
But then you have Vallabhacharya, who firmly champions realism. He says Brahman is both the material and efficient cause of everything, meaning the universe is absolutely fundamentally real.
Illusion versus undeniable reality. So how does Vallabhacharya possibly absorb Shankaracharya's view without just saying, hey, you're wrong?
Through an absolute brilliant application of that infinite capacity we just talked about. Vallabhacharya says, look, Brahman is so infinite that it desires varied types of creation.
Varied types, like it changes its methods.
Yes, across vast cosmic cycles, which the texts call kalpas. Sometimes Brahman creates reality directly, making the universe entirely real.
Okay.
But in other cycles, in certain kalpas, Brahman chooses to create through Maya. The source uses the term Mahendrajalawat, which means like a grand cosmic magic trick or a dream state.
Oh, wow. So he doesn't negate the illusion theory at all. He just absorbs it as one of Brahman's many valid styles of creation.
Exactly. He tells the Advaita scholars, your theory of Maya is completely accurate. It's just operating in a different cycle of Brahman's repertoire.
But here's where it gets really interesting, because even when Vallabhacharya says the world is real in this cycle, he makes this razor-sharp distinction between the physical world and our human experience of it.
Yes, the distinction between Jagat and Sansar.
Right. So the text uses the example of a table. The physical matter of the table, the wood, its actual existence is Jagat. It was created by Bhagavan, so it is completely real.
The physical infrastructure is undeniable.
But the psychological attachment, a human walks in and thinks, this is my table, I paid a lot for this and makes me look rich. That ego-driven overlay, that anxiety that is Sansar.
It's a completely fabricated psychological ecosystem.
Yes. And according to Vallabhacharya, Jagat is real, but Sansar is a false temperament created by Maya. It's a total illusion. So the world is real, but our ego-driven perspective of it is the illusion.
It perfectly harmonizes the absolute reality of the universe with the undeniable illusion of the human ego. It's brilliant.
It really is. So theoretically, they meet at the summit. But let's talk about the ground level. Practice. Because on the level of practice, or sadhana, these two paths demand vastly different things from their followers.
They really do. Shankaracharya emphasizes jnana, the rigorous path of knowledge. You meditate on realizing, Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman, until even the concept of I and am completely disappear.
So only Brahman remains, you're dissolving the self.
Right, it's a path of subtraction. Whereas Vallabhacharya emphasizes bhakti, which is devotion, and devotion requires duality.
Because you can't have love without a lover and a beloved.
Exactly. You have to retain a sense of self in order to offer it in devotion.
So one path destroys the self to find truth, and the other uses the self to love the truth. Those are radically different user manuals.
They are. But crucially, neither acharya negates the other's paths. And the ultimate historical proof of this convergence is that friendship we mentioned at the start of the deep dive.
Between Madhusudana Saraswati and Vallabhacharya.
Yes. Madhusudana Saraswati was a massive heavyweight scholar of the Advaita tradition, a master of the path of pure knowledge. And Vallabhacharya was the living master of the path of devotion.
And normally, these two would spend their lives writing scathing takedowns of each other.
But instead, they formed an incredibly profound friendship. Saraswati was so close to Vallabhacharya that he shared his most private devotional practices, his Seva Vigraha, with him.
Which is just astonishing. In devotional traditions, your Seva Vigraha is fiercely guarded. You do not share that with a philosophical rival who technically believes your devotional duality is an illusion.
Exactly. But they actively participated in each other's spiritual vulnerability. And furthermore, Vallabhacharya actually accepted Shankaracharya as an actual avatar of Sadashiva, of Lord Shiva.
Oh, wow. He integrated him into his own theology.
He did. It's the ultimate institutional sign of reverence.
Which is just incredibly refreshing for us to hear today, you know? In a world of nonstop intellectual turf wars and echo chambers, these towering figures showed absolute philosophical integrity.
Because they never forgot the Upanishadic bird analogy. They knew they were just processing different parts of the same infinite elephant.
Yeah, and that brings us to the ultimate summary of this entire journey. I mean, we spend so much time searching for the quote-unquote one right answer that just crushes all the other theories.
We want to win the debate.
Right. But the incredible takeaway here is that true knowledge isn't a zero-sum game. Absolute truth is vast enough to comfortably hold seemingly opposite views without breaking.
And that leaves us with a pretty lingering thought to chew on. You know, we've seen how the ultimate reality must inherently possess Viruddha Dharma. It perfectly holds contradictory characteristics.
It can be the rope and the snake.
Right. So if the ultimate reality of the universe is vast enough to embrace entirely contradictory characteristics without breaking groan, what does that say about the rigid ways we define our own personal truths?
Ooh, that's a big question.
And how might we practice a little more Viruddha Dharma when dealing with the contradictory people in our own daily lives? If the universe isn't afraid of contradictions, why are we?
That is such a phenomenal thought to leave on. Thank you to you, the listener, for bringing such an intellectually rich set of sources to the table today. We just love pulling these ideas apart with you. So keep questioning the boundaries of your own knowledge, keep looking for the whole elephant, and we'll catch you in the next deep dive.